Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and this is CSM 16 interviews continuing, this time with DutchGunner. How you doing, Dutch?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming. And before we jump into this once more, I will just quickly explain the rules. Anybody who is interested in running for the CSM, which is the Council of Stellar Management, the player-elected group that we host elections, or CCP actually hosts elections every year. The candidacy process has begun, and therefore our interviews of the candidates have begun. Each candidate is given 1 hour total to come on the show and discuss their platform. I will have pulled up their platform and looked through it, and any other experience with the person I have will be fully disclosed. After 50 minutes of me asking any questions or us exploring any options that we want to, I'll make sure that there is 10 minutes for the candidate to discuss any issues that they wish to make sure that they have an opportunity to get their points across. And these will all be on the my YouTube. And so hopefully we'll have a good CSM season. So all that out of the way, DutchGunner is a member of the Arataka Research Consortium, which is a somewhat of an RP group. They have a long history with working with the lore and interfacing with it in many ways, which I'm sure we'll dig into. But also was notably a FC during and after invasions, doing a lot of exploring the PvE content, and most famously recently published a guide to understanding the Drifter Doomsday mechanic and how to best dodge it. Before we go any further, do you have any accolades, or is that pretty much a good introduction for you?
Yeah, that's a good introduction. Other than small additions, like I ran for CSM last year for the first time, and this is going to be my second run.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Like I didn't make it into the CSM, but I'm having a second go at making it this year.
Right. So you ran for the CSM last year. We did interviews and we talked about it and all that stuff. You actually did pretty well, I would say. And the hope is that this year you will be the year that you will be able to get on, right? So obviously you and I, in that full disclosure way, you and I have known each other for quite some time. We've talked quite a bit, so you're not a complete stranger to me. One of the things that we've discussed about a lot is the fact that last year the player base had a very different understanding about the lore, the universe, what PvE is and what it could be. A lot has changed this year. Do you think that that influences your campaign? Does it influence the way you think about your campaign at all? The difference between where we're at now versus where we were during your last campaign?
One of the big differences is that last year I was the only candidate who also included lore and lore related content to really say, hey, like this is a lot that I know about, and there's a lot of potential, and it's seriously underestimated or overlooked both by mostly by players on what is all happening. And this year, there are a lot more candidates, including lore and lore related content in their platform. So it definitely seems to have hit a soft spot, or it gotten traction with more and more people, including it by seeing the potential it has in adding content and fun experiences to the game.
1 second. I'm changing the stream title real quick. Boom. Okay. So, yeah, that's a good point, I guess. So there's an increased competition for CSM, as opposed to last year within your niche. Do you think that that translates to an increased voter base? Do you think that there's increased interest, or do you feel like there is a need for this kind of candidate, and that's why that you're seeing this energy? Or do you feel this is just another challenge, or like simply a hurdle to an already difficult process?
I think that the amount of candidates that picked it up is a clear sign of a recognition of the potential and how much it can add. The Triglavian campaign from chapter 1 to chapter 3 and the current Poshvin situation certainly emphasized upon it. But if I'm looking at the amount of candidates for the different things, like the amount of wormhole candidates, the multitude of low sec candidates, the lore related candidates, like it makes it hard for people to choose and for each candidate to increase their odds at making it into the CSM, because not everybody's gonna have the same preference. There's going to be the part where people decide, like, hey, who do I think is the most likely to make it? And that could mean that instead of one candidate getting a strong representation by getting a lot of votes, those votes are going to be spread out. And then you could reach the point where if one candidate for a platform is eliminated and those votes don't transfer over because there's only one number one spot on a large number of ballots, then you could end up with the position that no candidate for a certain platform is made into CSM. So at the same time, it's both a positive where you see that it there's a lot of people saying like, hey, this adds stuff. That at the same time, for individual candidates, especially the ones that don't have the backing of a big block, like it hurts their chances at the same time. So there's a pro and a con.
Right. So that is a good point. The election process, the CSM election process, is a ranked voting system. So you can vote on multiple people, and you just set up who your rank is. And so if your vote is not necessary or not useful, or if your candidate gets eliminated in a previous round, then it goes down your voting list. So that way, the vast majority of people who vote will have their vote usefully consumed to get someone elected, basically, is the goal. So the nice thing about this is that you could have multiple people running under the same platform that are maybe competing with each other. And as long as you rank them in order, then if like your first place gets eliminated, then or gets in, then you're still voting for the next person and the next person, right? So, but it still does mean that if the vote is divided enough, especially that number one vote, those first couple rounds are critical, because it's way too easy to just be a little bit too low in that first vote threshold and get eliminated, and then you would have gotten a whole bunch of votes later on because you were like everyone's number two or number three vote. But if you're no one's number one vote, you're out before you ever even get those, and so that would be the real concern. So all
Yep,
that
that's
said,
certainly something. That's certainly something that affected me last year, because after the election was over, somebody published all, and I'm just going to call the ballot blocks.
mhm.
And there was one ballot block that had me at number two and another person at number one. I dropped out at position 17. The person on position one dropped out at position 14. Um, I've checked if it was the other way around and I would be on number one instead of number two, that would have pushed me at least to position 12
Wow. Okay, good.
instead of position 17.
Right.
So that position where you end up and how long you stay in the race, it has a big difference, including the part where people say like, hey, I like this candidate, but I don't think he's going to make it, so I'm going to vote for somebody else. And then you get a self-fulfilling prophecy where that person does indeed not credit the votes that he needs to make it into the CSM.
Okay. So all that being said, one second. Hold on. All right. All that being said, the question is of without calling out any, I don't want to like compare you to other individual candidates right now. I'm not asking you to call out anybody or say that somebody else isn't good, but of all of the candidates that are purportedly to represent the lore or the lore community or the PvE aspect of the things, why should you be the one that our voters put as the number one position as opposed to the number two or number three position?
It's there's a lot of synergy with the different candidates. But if you're talking about why people should vote for me, Eve is not there's not a single way to play Eve. There's a lot of people who like the social aspect, who like challenges, but they just don't care about the nullsec because of politics, because of big fights, or whatever reason. They don't particularly care about low sec for whatever reason. and they do want to have their content and their challenges. And that's the part where, if you look at Mike Azariah, who is there for the new player experience and people getting started to find their way, I'm a really good candidate for, hey, if you're here on the longer run and you still want your challenges with lore related content, then I'm a good candidate for that, because that's where I currently specialize in, because I got burned out from nullsec with the politics and the backstabbing. um, I didn't care much about nullsec, but I did see that there was a lot of interesting things with um, PVE, with like what happened with the incursions and how much traction it gained before the incursions were fully implemented, because people were excited. There were droves
Invasions?
of people, invasions, just trying to figure out what's happening. And it opened up a room for a lot of people to interact and feel like, hey, I'm contributing in one way or another. And I'm acting in a way that matters. And one of the things that helps with that is also where, if you look at the end of chapter 2, ARC published a analysis, and we said like, hey, these blue stars seems to have an exceptional high percentage of getting hit. And that was a prelude to the chapter 3, where it's like, yeah, those blue stars are really damned important. And apparently, um, we as ARC as a whole and the people involved in our community hit the nail on the head in such a way that real world media had interviews, and people working in CCP said like, hey, I wrote it and we thought we had a leak.
Yeah.
So it's a clear sign and a way to say like, hey, it's Eve is not just about the nullsec fights, the backstabbing. There's also other things that are newsworthy and draws attraction.
It is also, yeah, it's worth noting. There's two things that I think that demonstrates. One, exactly how much work CCP puts into things that may come across as just seemingly random, right? Like the fact that there was a pattern to be worked out that had value at all, even though they did not expect you to discover it, right? I think that is actually really worth noting. But also the fact that your group was willing to put in the work to track the stuff and build the pattern over time, discovering the statistical anomaly that would allow you to predict and understand the Triglavians' motivations, right? So it's simultaneously amazing both that existed at all to be a thing to discover, but also that you guys discovered it. And so I think that's a really exciting thing and something that you could theoretically speak to as a CSM member when you're talking to them. But it does bring up an interesting question, which is that historically the CSM haven't really interfaced with the lore community or anything like that. Do you feel that that's just because there haven't been the correct CSM member, or do you think that the CSM is an appropriate tool to discuss these kinds of things with CCP, given the fact that like an NDA and secret knowledge, which is what being a CSM kind of lends itself to being able to do, may go up against a lot of the mystery or lore-ish pieces to things? I just threw a lot at you. I'm just going to give it back to you to talk on.
It's a really big question, and it has a lot of layers. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to address all of them, but part of it is probably going to be the timing. um, Running for CSM, I mean, being part of the CSM, you're heavily dependent on what CCP is working on, what they have in the development pipeline. And if you have great ideas, but they don't fit in, that's not something you can then push for to get it included. And that's one of the reasons why my post doesn't have things like, I guarantee I'm going to introduce this, or I'm going to push for that, or I'm going to make this happen, because that's not how the CSM works. Like, sure, I've got ideas, but it depends on what CSM is working on. But with the Triglavian invasions, with chapter 1, 2, and 3, and the big impact it had, it really just proven that there is a really big support base amongst the players that are interested and want to interact with these things. And um, if it wasn't on the radar because the previous CSMs had other things. There were different things being worked on. It just didn't show up on the radar. And now with everything that's happening, it's a good thing to do include, especially because despite things going wrong with the introduction of the chapter 3 and a lot of the mechanics, there's also a really big amount of potential that you can expand upon and create more dynamic content to make the universe feel more and more alive without having to reinvent the wheel, or just completely ditch anything that has been worked on before.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say is? I like to. I like to ask, like, find out the area of space or the mechanic that really gets a CSM candidate going, and ask them what the purpose and value of it is. Right. So, in your case, I'm going to just pick Poshfin. So, what do you believe is the purpose and value of Poshfin?
Oh boy, that's a big one. For like, part of me thinks that Poshfin is, it's a complete new part of space with its own dynamics, and you have a lot of you got a completely different biome. You have a part of space that has mechanics from nullsec. It has mechanics from wormhole space, but there are certain restrictions, like you can't build any more player structures. It's NPC stations, and if any upwell structure is removed, that's it. You can't replace it. Um, and you can see a lot more interesting mechanics, like what happens with the wormhole connections. I mean, Poshfin is uniquely positioned where it is connected to high sec, it's connected to low sec, it's connected to wormhole space, it's connected to null sec, mostly, at least to the best of my knowledge, mostly or only the rogue drone, like the drone lands. But it depending on the connection, you get different roaming
So, I
fleets.
had that corrected, by the
And
way, the other day.
oh,
So
okay.
there's actually two different wormholes. One that seems to only ever connect to drone lands, but there's actually a second kind of wormhole that can a connection to Poshfin that can go to anywhere in nullsec. So
Well,
there are
there you
rare
go. But there
connections in
could be a
nullsec
reason.
outside of drone lands, but there's a specific wormhole that only goes to drone lands. That's how that works. Sorry, go on.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, that's the part where, that's why I said mostly to the drone lands.
Right.
Um, but
Sorry, I corrected that because
it's
I've been the one that's saying that a lot. So now that I've learned it, I'm trying to like correct it every single chance that I get to counteract that. Proceed.
but it's still a bit hard to say at this point, because there were signs that Poshfin that we have right now wasn't what was fully intended, but there wasn't enough time to implement everything the way CCP would have liked it.
Mhm.
Um, and I have a feeling that there's still a lot more that could be done, and there are still things in the pipeline to be introduced in Poshfin. But it's certainly is currently, it's like it's hot real estate. There's a lot of ore with where you can find basically almost every mineral that you need. It's you have a lot of different connections, a lot of different opportunities to challenge yourself, because you could have really easy sleeper combat sites at a wormhole to the wormhole space, or you could end in the worst kind of escalation where it's like, hi, here, have a wave of 8 drifter battleships with a few drifter cruisers, and then there's more, and we're just going to melt your face off and you're going to like it.
Hmm. Yeah. So okay. Um, so you think that Poshfin is hasn't really been fully implemented, and you're hoping to see it worked on more in the future? Is that pretty much?
Yeah, it's in a position where, um, it would make sense story, like if you look at it as a story where you're reading a book. You've had the introduction of the drifters and the sleepers, then you had the introduction of the triglavians and Edencom, and we know that the drifters and triglavians don't go along. Drifters hate everybody, triglavians trying to take their own turf, or and reclaim things they consider their ancient domain. And there's a lot of potential to build upon what has happened, where both Edencom supporters and Triglavian supporters get their piece of the pie. Because if Triglavians or sleepers get active both in Empire Space and Poshvin, the people that supported Edencom can still fully interact with it. People in Triglavian space have their own decisions how they want to proceed. And if you look at Edencom, because Edencom has been created, you can expand upon it by saying, like, hey, what about these pirate factions going against the empires? Because there's Edencom that you can add in between, that if people want to support the pirate factions, they lose Edencom standings, but still have access to Empire space without having their Empire standings sunk and not be able to get anything done in HiSec unless they start getting alts or go for a massive grind. So there's a lot that can be expanded upon with the current situation as it is.
Right. That's a good answer. So what about the current events? We basically had very quiet ever since New Year's, and really ever since Poshvin. A lot of people have been thinking that the player Eve or CCP is like abandoned the storyline or whatever. And yet now this week we've seen a lot of activity. We've seen 2 separate NPC dread attacks using this new authorized high security Sino beacon. Hints of a future event with the Equilibrium of Man, as well as new stuff for Aegis and rogue drones. It's very clear that something is coming. And then this week has been a big collection of world news and in-game events. There seems to be a very strong emphasis in making sure that, like, if there's something happening in the world news, that we can point to something in the game and being like, this is the thing that's happening. Whereas in the past, that hasn't necessarily been the case. How do you feel as, like, let's pretend like you're already on the CSM, you're working with CCP on all this and they're doing all this. Do you feel like this is the kind of thing that you're talking about? Is this where you want to go? Are you supportive of what CCP is doing? Do you have any criticism, or how would you as a CSM member deal with a week like this week?
Um, I think that compared to how things happened in the past, where you just had to pay attention if something was uploaded in the world news page, like, hey, is something in there, and is there anything that I can get as a hint? Like, is this something I need to be looking at? Where it was more about being in the right place at the right time to interact with things, and then afterwards, after things were done, you could see it published on the world news page. Now they're sending out thing like, hey, there's this in-game news where it's CCP Twitch streaming, where it's like, this is happening in this system. And there's, as soon as it happens, there is a breaking news, this is happening. So it's a lot more that there is more time for players to pick up on, oh wait, something is happening, where is it happening, do I want to interact with it, and if so, where do I need to be? So that's a big improvement in putting the message out, like, something is happening, this is where it's happening. And the role player communities or entities such as and I apologize if they're a bit outdated or not that active anymore, but CVA, Pi, Electus Matari, Ushra Khan.
Oh no, I'm pretty sure they're all
Like
pretty active at the moment.
yeah, but they have something where they can interact with it now. They can start working on the Intergalactic Summit, where they can reach out, make preparations to see what's happening. So it's a lot more dynamic, and there's a lot more option for people to interact with it. So CCP is on a really good course right now on making people aware what is happening, aftermaths, and people can just, like, how do I get involved or pay attention to this? And a lot of different backgrounds, whether you're there for role play or it's like, hey, I'm with this group, but they just organize fun things, even though I don't involve myself in role play myself, I'm still having fun. It's something everybody can interact with.
I mean,
So what they're doing now, I'm in fully support of it, and I'd like to see more of it.
are they really putting it out there though? Like, the world news is still not on any kind of update or anything like that. They are going live on Twitch, but like it's still not on like updates.eveonline.com doesn't, as General Stargazer points out, doesn't even get updated with the news pretty often. So um I feel like one of my concerns would be your group is one of the groups that actually has had a lot of things happen to you in the lore, like these kinds of what people would consider live events. Like the people are thinking that 3 dreads showing up is somehow ridiculously special, and yet your guys' facilities have been attacked multiple times. You guys have had to go over months of negotiations, tried to work with different empires, NPC actors, player character actors. You've been attacked by Sancha, you've been attacked by drifters. All kinds of stuff has happened to you, and yet all the time players are saying that like nothing's happening, and yet Air Talker Research Consortium's just always, like not always, but has had a pretty rhythmic set of events happening to you that people just simply don't know about. So like, are they really doing well when it comes to putting it before the player base now, or is it just that it's better than it was before and so you're happy now? Like,
It's a lot better
right.
than how it was before. And like I got actively involved in ARC shortly before chapter 1 of the invasion, so a lot of the backstory is more like me being outside looking in and seeing the reports as well. But it's the part where if you put in the effort, like look at Electus Matari and no, let's make it wider. Look at faction warfare and what happened in Flosseswin.
Mm-hmm.
Like players made an agreement, like, hey, let's make a separation where you don't get your agents top systems, we don't have ours. Somebody spilled the beans on the in character forums, and CCP ran with it, and you had a massive spike in activity in Flosseswin for both the Amar Empire and the Minmatar Republic.
Yeah.
So
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's not just ARC; it's looking at things and interacting with it. So you don't have to be part of an established group to have this happen to you. It's more if you get active in a certain way, or if you raise flags as something is happening, where you try to raise awareness, like, hey, something is happening here. If you're interested, now's the time to look into it and get involved. Things could happen, and that's a big improvement. More with putting the word out there, people are becoming more and more aware, like, hey, oh wait, there's a world news item, like I didn't know that. Or there's lore, there's hints, like if I'm flying around and I'm paying attention, I could see the stargaze, there's this strange flicker.
Mm.
Perfect example, Caroline Star. There was one player looking, it's like, hey guys, I see this strange thing, can you look into it? And all of a sudden you paid attention, and a spectacular event has your name on it now, Caroline Star, because your character was the one that reported about it first.
That's right. And yeah, and that is actually, I think, often a underrepresented portion of this. When we talk about like, oh, it's just this, or oh, it's just that, or oh, all of the structures in Poshfin will eventually be destroyed. Like, what's the point? Well, these stories are the point, right? Like when CCP decided to do Caroline Star, they had no idea that it would be called Caroline Star. They had no idea how long it would take for us to figure it out. They had no idea how we would figure it out. It was just a thing that was happening, and we interacted with it, and combined together, storyteller and players, we etched into history a piece of the story, and that story gets told over and over again. And everything that's happened after that is subtly influenced by our decisions and who did it and how it all plays out, regardless of whether or not we intended it. And this is actually one of the things I really don't like about the Invasions Chapter 3 narrative, because people think that like, just because Edencom didn't win, or that winning wasn't really like the plan in that sense, doesn't mean that every system that they turned fortress wasn't a victory. That doesn't mean that they didn't shape the way that Eve looks now. The reason why certain systems are now gone and certain systems are not now gone is because of the choices and the work and the effort that players made during that time. And I think that players like to undermine that because they're mad at Niarja being gone or something like that. but I think that it is definitely a disservice to undermine the unique nature of being able to tell a story over time, in real time, through the mechanics of Eve, and etch our name and our fingerprints into the stars. And so I think that that's a very important factor, and why I appreciate how much you have engaged with these kinds of content and have always challenged to understand the puzzle, understand the challenge to get good at it, rather than decide whether or not it's a valuable thing to do, or whether or not CCP is right for allowing the change to happen.
Right. This is a big topic, and I want to give my version on it on different topics, and I'm sure some of them are going to be considered controversial. So before you type in any questions or comments, just hear me out until the end, and then draw your conclusions. Um, I was heavily involved with Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. I helped design a major effective um, fleet composition. I think at one point we were the most active group in Chapter 1 running the World Arc Proving Grounds, not because the payoff was fantastic, but we loved the challenge. Even knowing what was coming, like we didn't know if we were going to make it until the end. And as soon as more details came out at the end of Chapter 2, what was going to happen in Chapter 3, we were like, oh crap, we're scientists. We're not here to all of a sudden organize an influx of hundreds of players looking at us, tell us what to do. It's like, guys, we can't do that. We're scientists. We just figured it out. So, and then the part where it became what it was. It's like we as a alliance, as a community, like we were not equipped to interact that way with the content, with the Triglavian invasions. And that's part of the things where um, the sandbox works as well. Because sure, you create your own story, and CCP puts things in where, depending on player interactions, it could go one way, it could go the other, or if players decide to blow something up, certain storylines or story parts are gone forever because items are gone and you'll never get that clue again. Like that happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the groups that interact to also give feedback to the people who are showing up. And if there's disappointment, say like, hey, okay, look, this is what we're expecting. We're gonna have to make the best of it. This is what we're going to do. And what I started to do was, instead of running conduits, because we just couldn't keep it up, hours upon hours upon hours, like, hey, there's a minor victory system here. We're going to go in there. We're going to poke at the war post. We're going to just figure out mechanics behind that, and we'll share those findings. And at the end of Chapter 3, it's like, okay, so there's Poshfin. You know what? Let's go in there, start poking at drifters and rogue drones, and see what we can do to gain mutual standings and learn more about what's happening within Poshfin. The next part is probably going to spark controversy, but one of the big reasons that things happened the way they were is because I think it was an oversight from CCP. If you introduce a story and you're the creator, you know everything from start to finish. And if you know everything from start to finish, and their path would be, okay, we're going to need a new faction. We want to raise interest, and we want people to support that faction without burning their empire standings, because it's going to take a while. So, Edencom, perfect stopgap. You lose standings with Edencom, you help the new faction, you get access to their space, and now all of a sudden you're not going to win every time, and you still want to have a way to regain some of the standings that you're still not hamstrung if you want to move freely within high sec. So there's rogue drones, there's drifters, and you can get those lost standings back. From a designer point of view, it's like, hey, you dedicate yourself, and there is a way to regain those standings, even if it is a grind. That makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But that's when you know the process from start to finish. Players who are interacting, they don't know the full story. They get snippets here, they get some misinformation, and they draw their own conclusions. And they make their actions based on those assumptions. And um, there was a strong rhetoric from nullsec, like, oh, we have an opportunity to fuck up highsec. Let's go. And there's people like, hey, look, I don't want to lose what I have because this is how I enjoy my Eve. So they massively flocked in support of Edencom.
Right.
And if I would have been on the CSM and these plans would have been sent, I would have told CCP from the get go, like, hey, there's going to be a massive amount of support for Edencom because
Yeah.
people don't want to see things get messed over because this is how they enjoy the game.
Yeah.
And that's something I
Legend.
also mentioned last year, where it's like, hey, there's no such thing as a one way to play the game.
That's true. And so one of the things I have heard rumors, I don't know this as a primary source, but the rumor is that CCP didn't really have like a plan for Edencom insofar as like Edencom is basically just not trig. And so the expectation was that like people would fight for Edencom because of course Mission Runner, like whoever's interested in that system might fight to make that system happen. And maybe people will run Edencom because it's a way to do PvE without the system dropping into low sec halfway through or something like that, you know, to run those the PvE was easier, safer as a Edencom person. So that's the reason why people would do it. But the idea that like there'd be an organized force of players that would identify themselves as Edencom in the same way that players were expected to identify themselves as Kybernauts, I think the CCP was not quite as prepared for that. And you're saying that you would have been able to say like, hey, by the way, guys, Edencom's going to be a bit as big of a deal as the Kybernauts are. So make sure to keep that in mind when it comes to rewards.
Exactly, or at least point certain things out, because there's role players who are going to make decisions based on how they view things from a role play perspective. Like, for an example, the part where Karen Midgular was assassinated and Minmatar Republic NPC forces attacked Galente NPC forces. I was there. I was like, yeah, look, it's fun to kill them all because, hey, look, their target's good for my kill board, but I didn't do it because of role play perceptions, and that you could have like Electus Matari, Pi, Ushra Khan, CVA going like, hey, look, our empire, our people are under attack, so we're going to support them. There is a combined effort from the efforts. It's Edencom, so naturally we're going to side with Edencom.
Right. Okay. So
That's information I could have told them. Like, there is going to be a big influx, and it would leave less options of CCP being blindsided because they had the entire development from start to finish and just ran with that instead of looking, well, there's going to be another response as well.
right.
And
So
there was a big imbalance between the two sides. Like, systems could only get worse. And if something went first liminality, there it was a witch hunt on anything not pro Triglavian. And if things went towards Edencom, Concord, and the navies would still protect the Kybernauts. So there's a
hmm.
big feeling of like, hey, it's not fair, and it feels rigged.
It's interesting because, like,
And
if you look at it from the design point of view, like the Kybernauts have to do things in a more dangerous space. Edencom get to do it in a safer space. Therefore, you would think that the actual advantage would be towards Kybernauts. But what you're saying is that that's actually not true. But because you can't dominate the space, you can't stop them from doing what they're doing, and therefore your path is difficult just in a different way, which was
yeah,
maybe
but
not
that's
something that was
that's
expected.
like, look at chapter 2, the Dreadnought side, with thieves moving in.
Mm.
The solution was, okay, we're going to have an area of effect warp scramble effect, so anybody trying to sneak in with a small fast ship is going to be able is not able to grab the loot and instantly warp off.
Right.
That was a good idea, but they became suspect, but they forgot the mechanic that this is high sec, and if anybody shoots a suspect, they can no longer receive remote support because then that person is going to get concorded, and you're still in the middle of the site. So if you kill the dreadnought and somebody tries to take the dreadnought loot and you shoot him, you can't get logi support anymore, but the Triglavians or empires, npcs, are still attacking and warp scrambling you.
Right.
So that there are counterplays in place, but they don't fully work the way they do. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
like, yeah,
because
it's there and we
neutralogy.
could, but we still can't interact with it because this is high sec.
Right, the neutralogy rules interfere with normal fleet operations when one person actually tries to start engaging in PvP to stop the person stealing the loot. That is a good point. But okay, so I have 10 minutes left in my portion, so I want to get a little bit experimental and like put on our like you're already a CSM member and like a hypothetical situation, right? So
Okay.
on Sissy right now, there is some hints that what we're going to get is a return to resource wars, right? Some sort of new mechanic for competitive sites for running mining or defending mining operations, right? But it seems like this is tied into the construction of new stargates, right? Uh, from Amar to Stain, connecting Solitude to the main Galente network, and also hints that like maybe the Caldari or the Mimitar will have their own version of this. So let's assume that a couple of things. One, that player effort in these resource war sites will lead to the construction of these gates. That the gate, like we want to introduce these gates and we want to continue to uh, give players an opportunity to shape the way the Eve works. And so if players successfully complete these objectives, then the gate will be built. And if the players fail to do so, then it won't. This will allow people to, like, for instance, fight over whether or not there should be a low sec gate to Stain. Whether or not there should be a connection to Solitude. How would you, if you were already on the CSM and the CCP came and pitched you that as like their thing, what would you say to that? What kind of feedback would you give as a design option? We want to take the options of like what we learned from resource wars and what we learned from invasions and competition and stuff like that. We're going to set it in low sec so that way people can engage with each other. They have to go in there. It's a little bit more dangerous. Make the rewards. Do you think that's worth it? Is that a good use of resource wars? Do you think that learns from what from invasions, etc.?
I think it strongly depends on how it is designed. Like, I'm just going to make a reference to the first introduction of the geckos. You had goals for the combat fighters and you had goals for the miners and the industrials. Like, if they incorporate in that way, where you have people that need to fight off the attackers, the whether it's like, let's go with NPCs initially. Like, they need to fight off the NPC attackers, and you need the miners and the industrials to get the minerals, get the component, build the components, and then ship them off to the building site. That is something that is going to get a really big response, because all of a sudden everybody can contribute, and there's a common goal where you can see, okay, we need this many minerals, we need this many components, do we have them? Where it's not just combat, or it's not just industry or mining that gets the result. It's everybody contributing in his or her way. And then if you really want to add in the combat, you could say, okay, there's low sec, so you could have people picking one side or the other. It's like, hey, I want to prevent this, so I'm going to go after the haulers, or I'm going to try to interfere um, with the low sec sites. And I would say let's also put in the high sec sites, but make sure that in order to build that gate, you'll need both high sec parts and low sec parts, because that's the way where you can get as many people as possible involved, where they say, hey, this is what I like,
Right.
this is what I feel comfortable, like this is the situation that works for me, because I don't have hours upon a time, I don't have a network, but I can still work towards it and feel like, hey, I did my part. What about you?
Yeah, I think that the big advantage to that would be that, like, if you have a high sec version of the site, then that would allow players to experiment with the actual mechanics of the site, like what is expected from them. And then if there are low sec sites, then that would allow them to compete over the more impactful version of the thing now that they fully understand what's going on.
Yeah, but you need both the high sec and the low sec, so it's not
Right.
like you'll have um, 10 items of what you need in high sec, and you can get like, this is just me random picking numbers, you can get 100 from low sec. It's more like, okay, so you need these items you can only find in high sec sites, you need these items you can only get in low sec sites, and
Right.
then there's here this building site where you could have a different, where you need to get it to a drop off point. And if people move in and they want to oppose it, or they see an opportunity to be Pirates, it's like let's hack or do something with this drop off point and sneak away with part of whatever has been dropped in there. It opens up a lot of different play styles to interact and say like, hey, this was happening and this is what I did with it.
Right. So like the
And that
idea,
would be my input.
right. So the idea is that like as a CSM member, your value is that you can like identify the problems before they end up being and all that sort of stuff. So again, pretending that you're in your CSM and CCP Swift is even in chat. So let's pretend like I nailed it. This is exactly what's going to happen, right? Like the question is, as a person that was part of the Edencom stuff and was part of the disappointment in how invasions went, do you feel like this framework, as I loosely described it, fixes that problem, addresses the issues, shows that CCP is iterating on the design of competing over objectives and the kind of things that we saw in Invasions Chapter 3? Do you feel like this is still missing the mark, or do you see any problems with that scenario that wasn't brought up?
I think it's a good first step because there's a lot of people, um, probably both on the Kybernaut side, but I know for sure on the Edencom side where they felt like, okay, so I picked a side and basically I got very little to nothing as reward for all my efforts, and instead, the next part or the next thing that people could move up with, I have this massive ground. I'm effectively locked out because I'm at such a disadvantage to start interacting with Poshfin. Um, Doing something like that would certainly help repair the willingness and reinstate the willingness for players to interact with this kind of content and pick a side. If you balance have a balance where it's not one side has a lot of rewards and the other side is more like, yeah, you keep what you have right now, because that's not going to be an incentive
Well,
for people anymore to interact with it. So it's a first step to get people that incentive to start interacting and pick a side if they have to pick a side.
I think that the interesting thing about it though is the question of why somebody chooses one side or another. And like so in Invasions, it was really like, do you want this system to remain high sec or not? Right? Like that was the question. And if you did want it to remain high sec for whatever reason, you fought on the side of Edencom. And if you wanted it to remain null sec for whatever or turn into null sec for whatever reason, you fought for the Triglavians. And so the thing is that in this case, rather than deciding which 27 systems or whatever will be taken for the Triglavians, the question is now, will there be a low sex gate to stain? Will there be a connection to solitude? And I think that this is important because there are players that absolutely do not want a gate, a connection, a more direct connection to solitude. They live in solitude, they operate in solitude, and the nature of solitude as being a giant high-sec island is important to that fact. And therefore, they will actually fight against the construction of that gate if given the opportunity. Likewise, the gate to stain is such a meme. I almost would expect that people will choose one side or the other based on all kinds of different reasons. But the point of the matter is that if this kind of conflict, then in the end, whether or not that gate exists or how soon it gets made or whatever, whether or not there actually whether or not there should be a low sec gate to stain will forever be settled by the player's actions. They will either fight for it in order to make it not there or fight for it to make it there. Do you think that that's the secret sauce, the reward for both sides that was missing in Invasions?
Mm, I think so. If you have different phases, like if you're a high sec player, it's like, hey, I delivered these materials. I did this. I did my part. I did what I could do. I did what I'm comfortable with. So my contribution has been a success. This is not something where I could say like, hey, I failed, or if I had done something more, the outcome could have been different. Low sec, the same thing. The protectors, the haulers, there's going to be a lot less regret if it's more like, okay, we put in the effort and at one point that didn't work, but we did get all the way up to here, and if they get credited for that, Like, for example, everything, all the components were there, but at the last moment, the final
They didn't get the
transport of the final
surveying done
materials got blown up.
or whatever.
Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the part where, hey, like, there was a lot of effort. We almost made it. We want to thank everybody who contributed to it, especially all the loyal capsuleers. And then there could be a pirate faction or opposing faction saying like, hey, we want to thank the people who stopped this from happening because this is something that benefits us. Like, sure, you might not get the result that you wanted, but you do get the credit and the acknowledgement for the effort you put into it. And that's
So
something CCP is also picking up more and more and more. So they're on the right track.
let me turn that around on you then. How would that be any different than now? Really, like if we abstracted, it'd be, there's one side that wants to change the way things are, and there's one side that's fighting literally just to keep things the way they are, right? So like the people that are fighting to not put the gate up to solitude is really just fighting to have it be the same. And so if they were to quote unquote win, it's just like, congratulations, your victory is nothing happened. Yay. Right? Like, how does that fix the problem when the major issue that Edencom is saying is that their fighting for the status quo felt unrewarding? How does the gate scenario feel more rewarding as a fight for the status quo?
It's the two are not comparable. That's
Okay,
the
well, how
main
does this
thing.
learn
Like,
from the
you can't
lesson
say
then?
um it's more about okay, I did that. I could see a progress bar seeing these are the minerals, these are the parts. Like, it feels more that you're accomplishing something instead of I am number one out of I don't know how many thousands, and I'm just here to see what side is able to keep the grind up the longest, and that side is going to win. It feels less that you're individually or as a group have an impact on what's happening. And um, the gate situation is more about a connection, and this was more about you have an entire system moved out. You got connections that are gone. You're like, if you had a certain spot where you love to say like, hey, I've got my missions here, I've got other things that are specifically to that system, and that system is gone despite your best efforts, and then trying to get into that new state where the system is, and it's like, yeah, I'm locked out, and I have to go through such a grind, and I'm at such a disadvantage for the choice I made. That doesn't compare to the gate. So this is more like, okay, what's happened. There's no going back to that. There's no fixing what has happened. But instead of just looking at the negatives, like, look at the lessons. If you look at the Triglavian conduits, it was not a winner takes all. So it was a lot more, if somebody wanted to run the conduits and there was a fleet in there, they would say, you know what, we'll go for a different conduit because we don't want to see everybody's rewards cut down to such a grade that, like, for example, it doesn't even cover for the ammo that we expend. So it's a lot more live and let live.
It's
With
a, it's a
the incursions, it's like the winner takes all. So if you have the most X, if you got the best implants, you're going to stomp on anybody else like, oh, this looks like fun, I want to get in on it.
right.
So that's a step forward.
Although it's interesting to note because right now they're asking for the invasion sites that remain to be changed over to be more like the incursion system, so that way these guys that are coming into their sites to just steal payout can't do so anymore. But yeah, your point is very valid. The invasion system was designed to be supportive of other people coming into your site and also encouraged people to find a site of their own in order to work together for the collective as opposed to just being asked to each other. Um, but
It was a lot more friendly to get in, and at the same time, like, um
before you go in anymore, though,
with
we are
with
actually into your 10 minutes, so you now have the
oh,
rest of the
okay,
floor.
now you mention it.
Well,
Okay,
you
then
get 10 minutes from
I'm
here.
gonna oh, okay. Then I'm just gonna have to drop the comparison between incursions and invasions for now.
Okay.
What I really want to cover is there's a lot of candidates out there. There's a lot of hard choices, but at the same time, I think that this CSM is one of the first CSMs in a long time that have the option to have a really balanced representation, where you could have low sec and faction warfare candidates. You could have starter high sec with like Mike Esraya. Candidates like myself is more like, okay, if you're still in high sec, but you still want to have your challenges and your group interactions and lore. There's me. You got the null sec. You got the wormhole. So there is an amazing opportunity. And if you want to make your vote, like vote with who you really want to see on the CSM, not who you think is the most likely and who comes as a close thing to what you really want to see from the candidate you want to support, because those number one votes and who comes second and third, they make all the difference in the world, especially for the more individual candidates like myself. We don't have other backings, and if you like what candidates say, it's like, hey, this is something I want to get behind, give them that number one vote.
It's really important, and I think that now more than ever, like one of the most important things to think about is if we want to have good diversity, it's not about making it so the null blocks can't get in or to eliminate null block support in CSM. Like that's absolutely absurd and shouldn't even be the objective. But the key is that nullsec gets to have the representation that they do on the CSM because they're organized and they can convince their players to vote. And that is the big key. The null blocks will get their votes. And that's what keeps them in the election. That's what gets them through the rounds, and that's what gets them, 2 or 3 picks from a single group, from a single block voting thing. If people believe in the CSM and vote on it, even if they're outside of a block and vote on the people that they care about, you will end up having more realistic diversity in representation on the CSM. If the voting population multiplies by 2 to 3 times because more people realize that there is a need for these other candidate types to be on the CSM, and therefore they should vote to be able to make sure that people like DutchGunner and others get on the CSM, then there will be more votes overall for that kind of candidate, which means we may not just get one representative of PvE or lore or high-sec or whatever. We don't just have to rely on people like Mike Azariah, who is in chat and has done an amazing job as the CSM before. We don't have to be like, we got our one high-sec candidate, guys. Like, what if we did actually all agree that voting was important and we're going to vote for the candidates that we care about? And that makes it so that we get 4, 5, or 6 candidates, and then the nullsec guys can get their guys in based on who they vote for, and we get representation too. We can have our low sec, faction warfare candidate or whatever. It isn't about fighting for who you want to vote for. It's about reminding everyone that voting is important, and if you don't vote blocks, it's twice as important.
So in extension of that, like, why should you vote for me, or put me at number 2 or 3? I try to open content up for as many people as possible. The manual I wrote for how to deal with the drifters, it cracked everything. I included the tables like, hey, if you meet these requirements, you can make this happen, and you don't have to go ridiculously expensive on chips, fittings, and implants. I'm here to open up content as much as possible, and I am very capable of taking a step back, listening to what somebody brings up. It's like, okay, so expand upon it. I'm not going to have I'm not going to be biased because it would be go against something that I enjoy right now. Because if it's a good addition, let's go for that. Um, I'm good at analyzing, looking at things from different perspectives, and finding a right way. If a CSM candidates bring something up, and people are brainstorming or throwing out ideas, I pay attention. It's like, okay, so if we take this from that and that from that argument, and we combine it, look, this is an even stronger suggestion or approach than all those individual suggestions at the same time. And you get this synergy, because I'm not here to say I'm here against null blocks, I'm here against wormhole space, I'm against low sec, against faction warfare. I'm like, no, it's a joint effort, and you need people working together to come forward and say, like, hey, this is our view on things CCP present towards the CSM for feedback, or when they say, like, hey, we have ideas, or could you provide input from your side? Because that's what the CSM is for. We're not here to push for specific content or certain changes. That's not how the CSM works. But understanding that, and seeing the person like, hey, I want to work with others, those are the people you want to have on the CSM. And people that are approachable. Like, sure, I don't stream, because if I would be streaming, I wouldn't be able to have the time to also properly do my job if I get into the CSM.
Sure.
So I did my research. I reached out to people. I pay attention to people like Mike Esraya, Brisker Ball. How do they communicate? How do they give their feedback? And I build upon that, and I want to extend that, especially with the third term policy that CCP has implemented. Like, there's going to be good candidates who are going to run for their third term, and then they have to take a break for a year. And if you have other candidates in there picking up where what those people implemented in communication or anything else, you want that to continue and not end up with a situation where it's just dropped until that person is able to run for CMS again, and if they don't get elected, then that completely drops again.
All right. Well,
And
you ran.
I have a feeling I'm approaching the 10-minute mark now.
You are getting kind of close. So you ran last year. You're obviously undeterred. You're running again. You have a lot to offer to CCP, and a voice that hasn't been represented to them pretty well up until now. And quite frankly, they could probably use. Do you have any other final thoughts before we wrap this up?
I'm just gonna finish up with what I wrote in the post. Like, hey, there isn't a single way to play Eve. Let's make it a great experience together.
That is a wonderful sentiment to wrap this up on. Okay, well, thank you for coming and hanging out and giving this interview, DutchGunner. I look forward to watching your candidacy and wish you the best of luck, and absolutely hope that you remain a member of our community and advocate for your playstyles to CCP, regardless of how this election goes, because I think that you have been a very valuable member of our community for the last couple of years. So thank you.
I intend to continue what I do, and if I don't make it this year, then I'll run again next year.
All right, and that about wraps it up for this interview. And the CSM information is on the website. There will be an a voting process coming up soon enough. April 26th to the 12th of May is the submission period, which is, I believe, what we're in now. 26th to 14th, application processing. The voting itself begins on the 21st of June. So there's still time to apply. If you are running for CSM, be sure to DM me so that way we can schedule one of these interviews. And otherwise, please vote. Vote with your, pay attention. Find some candidates that you like, 4 or 5 of them, throw them up on your list, and take part in the process. Because the CSM is either, at the very minimum, a very interesting part of EVE Online, the fact that we have space politicians at all, but in a very real way is a useful way for CCP to communicate with the player base. And while it isn't the one solution for all communication between player base and the developers, it is a proven valuable thing. And voting for CSM is a proven valuable way to get representation and to allow our avenues and aspects of the game to get highlighted, both to CCP and the player base. So thank you all for taking part, and we will continue these interviews as the weeks go by. Until then, I've been Ashtarothi, and I'll see you in space. Thanks, DutchGunner.
Well, thank you for having me. It makes all the difference to have these interviews to help candidates get more exposure instead of just the forums and raise awareness of the CSM in general. So thank you for giving the opportunity and taking in the effort.
Yep, '07. All right. So I am going to uh, now that the show's over, I'll cut it off from here. I got a raid from Satonia and a whole bunch more follows. Thank you all for coming. This is the Eve Universe show. We have a show every Tuesday and Friday at the very minimum, but honestly, this week I've already put out, it looks like we're going to be having a grand total like 6 or 7 different YouTube videos, because we had 2 on Monday, 1 on Tuesday, 1 on Thursday, and then 2 or 3 more for today. Hey, Joachim gifting a T1 sub to DutchGunner. Thank you so much for that, Joachim. Pillar of the community. I appreciate that. But yeah, this is a new thing, the Eve Universe show. I'm going to, I'm trying to make sure that you guys have content and to keep I'm here to put Eve into context for you, my fellow Empyreans. That's what I meant to say. And I do appreciate all the support that you guys have given me. And if you're willing to, please head on over to my YouTube channel and subscribe and watch the videos there as well, especially if you miss them live. I actually have enough subscribers to become a YouTuber person, but I don't have enough watch time. So check out those videos. Thank you. Other than that, what are you supposed to do this weekend? I mentioned, so this weekend I would keep an eye on the market. There's going to be lots of opportunities there. And also prepare, because next week is Capsuleer Day. And it looks like we're not only going to have Glamourix boosters, which will help out with standings increases if you're interested in getting characters standings up for either your market trading or getting into higher level missions or whatever. So Capsuleer Day will involve the boosters that allow you to get standings easier for that limited time, as well as the normal accelerators and all that stuff. It also looks like there will be the EOM sites and a bunch of other stuff involving that. It's unsure whether or not the EOM is going to be related to Capsuleer Day or is related more towards the quadrant stuff that's coming. But either way, next week we'll have new opportunities, including that Glamourix booster. So preparing for that is going to be pretty critical. And then also for the 18th birthday is that absolutely insane 18-way free-for-all in the Abyssal Proving Conduit. So, building the ships for that, making sure that the market is fully stocked with all of the weapons and ammo types and all that stuff that you expect for people to want to use during that event is another good way to spend your day. But until that, I am going to see whether or not there is somebody to raid. Let's find out. Let us find out. Oh, man. I'm going to raid Gory Xander because he's got one person on, which means I think that he's kind of new. But Gory Xander, we did an interview with him earlier, or a couple weeks ago when I was on TIS, and he's just one of these awesome new bros. He's got 26 days in. Send him plenty of love.
Let's do it.
I will see you next week. And until then, I'll see you in space.